So when we talk about Texas and the future of energy in the state, I want to ask each of you from your perspective as a policymaker, lawmaker, as a data guy, as a general manager of Austin Energy, about what do you think are the specific challenges to Texas or to Austin from the work you do? What about as a policymaker?
As a policymaker, I think, I'm very interested in sustainability, adding as many renewables to our portfolio as possible, but one of the challenges is balancing that with affordability. I represent one of the lower income districts here, District 2, Southeast Austin. We are the most Hispanic. The median income for a family of four is about $44,000. So it's the challenge of wanting to stay aggressive when it comes to pushing our goals for renewables and being green. When we think of sustainability, we think in terms of ecology. In circles like this, we think of as it relates to ecology, as it relates to our depletion of our natural resources. Folks that I represent think of sustainability as wanting to be able to sustain the ability to continue to live in Austin, Texas, and pay their bills and buy groceries. Many families that I represent are making decisions of keeping the lights on or keeping food on the table. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, is making sure that we're pushing towards more renewables, but also making sure that we remember our low-income folks and not leave them behind.
From the research and data point of view, what do you see as the challenges, or the challenges?
I think it's actually a great place to be doing something in this renewable space and the R&D side, because one of the disciplines that has to happen here in Texas, because it can't really be, there's not a supportive public policy as much at the state level, is then what you have to do is say, okay, what you have to find what people want. And actually, at the end of the day, what people want is going to be a lot more setting you up for success. Because if people want it, it'll happen more readily. Kind
of back to our first conversation of the day, the people are driving it. For you, when you think about the challenges facing Texas and Austin in terms of energy.
So one of the great things about Texas is the ERCOT wholesale market and how that's allowed for the proliferation of renewable energy and advancing wind in a large, big Texas way. And following that with solar. And then looking at what's happening in our marketplace, when you look at some of the generation and the announcements that have been made recently with regard to retiring baseload plants that provide inertia on our system. And so one of the things that we're going to have to figure out, the big challenge is, if we're seeing some of that generation being taken out of the marketplace and we're seeing this addition of renewables, how are we going to balance that in this great infrastructure that's been created and make sure that we do it reliably so that we don't have rolling blackouts and brownouts and we keep the lights on and we do so affordably.
It's the second time we've heard the word balance in one of these answers. I want you guys to just think pie in the sky, no limitations, perfect world scenario. What would you like to see about Texas energy production for the people who live in your district? What would be a perfect scenario?
I think a perfect scenario would be, similar to what Georgetown has right now. They have, they're entirely that, but we can't do that here in Austin because we own our utility. A situation where we can increase our investment in renewables but keep prices low. I talked to one of the producers about a story. I own a used Leaf. Me and my husband bought one of the Leafs that are coming off of leases, and I'm on this forum. And there's a gentleman that we post all kinds of funny things, and the guy said, I'm sure many of you bought your electric car because you're a bunch of hippies and you want to save the planet. And he said, I bought it because it saves me money. And I think that's the place everybody wants to be. That's the dream place. Can we all drive electric cars and all have energy that's produced solar or by wind, but keep prices low? I think that's the place we want to be.
Brewster, don't let any pragmatic things come into your head from the data that you collect.
We're kind of held back by the data. It provides a big government of the truth. I remember one of Jackie's predecessors, Roger Duncan, used to say, my dream is that everyone has clean, renewable energy. My nightmare is that everybody has clean, renewable energy. And because what it speaks to is that there's some real promise in a lot of these technologies, but they also have some side effects or challenges of themselves. So like, for example, what's the biggest barrier to having renewable energy? It's winter. So unless we can figure out changing the magnetic tilt of the Earth,
I told you pie in the sky. I said
yes,
go for it.
well, yes. So if we can fix that, because we have 11 hours of sunlight or something right now, and you have your peak demand in the mornings. Well, that doesn't work, and wind doesn't fill it in. But I do think we are headed to a place where, at least on the residential side, you're going to see in the next 25 years that photovoltaics become a pretty common part of American homes.
And do you have a pie in the sky?
So it would be wonderful if we could be 100% renewables and do so as a state or as a country. But the reality of that is that the physics of the systems don't yet allow us to do that. So how do we get there in a sustainable way? Well, we have to be innovative, and we have to bring new products and new information to users, and we have to make that so that the system holistically works and is, again, balanced. I think it would be great if we could break through batteries. Not only batteries from the storage capability and the size and all of that, but from a sustainability aspect, because we use rare earths in the production of batteries. And so looking at that whole life cycle, the panel that we heard before from the manufacturers in Dell and what they're trying to do in terms of making sure that we have that whole evolution and that we have that reuse capability. And additionally, if we can get to the point where consumers can use less and less of our product, that helps to lower their costs. And as we have cost pressures on some of these other applications, we can balance that out so that they don't notice the changes in their bills.
Can you explain to folks what, do you say pecan or pecan street?
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a regional pronunciation word until I started working for a company called Pecan. And you get outside of Texas, Louisiana, and no one else calls it pecan. It's everybody else calls it pecan. So
well, we're in your town,
whatever you want to call us.
Can you explain to folks what you do and how you collect your data?
Yeah, so we are the utility industry version of an agricultural extension service. So what that means is we do real-world applied research that brings together universities and industry and test things out in the real world. So from the data perspective, what we're doing is we are measuring every minute, in some cases every second, from hundreds of homes throughout Texas and a little bit around North America, down to the appliance level. What are people doing? It's all volunteer, and then we'll test out, introduce new technologies if they want to test them out. And we share all of our anonymized data for free with over 250 universities in 62 nations around the world. So you have the academic community and industry coming together with our data to bring a data lens on some of the progress of these issues of how do you integrate new technologies, how do you integrate more renewables, how do you integrate batteries into homes, something we're doing with Austin Energy right now.
Practically, you mean you put sensors in people's homes and see how much toast they're making? I mean,
it's not that creepy, but what we'll do is it's a pretty common device for people that have solar panels, but it's not something you need just for solar panels. It's a device that you attach at the breaker panel, and you put a little clip on each one of the circuits, and then they have a little computer in the breaker panel, and then it just transmits all the data to our data center. So we, like for example, one of the things we were looking at that was kind of a big deal, was a surprise, was that it turns out it's a lot easier to serve electric cars from a utility perspective than people thought, because there was a fear at the time that, to put this in perspective, so a house may use like 2,000 to 12,000 watts at any given time, and an electric car comes along and what it's charging can be like 3,000 to 6,000 watts or even higher. So you could have 50% increase, and so the fear was that if everybody was charging at the same time, then it would actually it would make it where the utilities could not, with their existing infrastructure, serve a lot of electric cars. But what we did is when we looked at the data for several years And we found is that people's charging patterns were a lot more distributed than people thought. And in fact, about a year and a half later, O-Power came and looked at a different part of the country and found the same thing we did. And so it actually, the electric grid can handle a lot more electric cars with existing infrastructure than was believed, which is a big deal because that means that they're actually a great revenue source for electric utilities so long as they don't have to drive up a lot of equipment costs. And they apparently don't.
So I have a question for you, and I'm going to broaden out to both of you as well. Puerto Rico is 70 days without power. If someone came to you and said, based on the data you have, what should our new grid look like? What should our smart grid look like? What does your data tell you if you started from the ground, zero, nothing in place? Should a grid look like for...
Alison, that is an awesome question. That's something we talk about all the time internally because you're like, well, you wouldn't do it the same way. So first off, to have a modern electric grid is an exceedingly challenging, engineering intensive, requires well-developed, systems of governance and engineering, et cetera. And so if that blows apart, the challenges in some of these areas like Puerto Rico, it's not a terribly resilient system. It is in the mainland U.S. because it's more well developed. But what you do is you'd say, okay, well, let's get triage electricity as fast as possible. And so what you'd want to have is like kits basically. You'd have some photovoltaics, a battery, maybe the ability to plug in a diesel or gas generator. And you'd hook up a circuit panel and you'd say, okay, job number one is keep the refrigerator on. Job number two is keep one room with a fan and an electric outlet and a light bulb. And it turns out that we modeled in much of the U.S., if you had a 5 kilowatt hour battery and like 3,000 watt PV system, you could run a refrigerator and a bedroom with a light, fan, and plugs for a year under any scenario without ever discharging more than half the battery. So that would solve the problem right there of giving people the job number one. It makes sure your food doesn't spoil. You have life, health, safety stuff. You can build out from there. So I think what we're going to see at the end of the day is, like we did with mobile telecom, is a distributed system start to integrate in with the centralized system, and they'll be complementary, and they'll port in with each other. There's a lot of technical challenges to work out, but I think we're headed that way, and that would make a big deal in a place like Puerto Rico.
When you hear, I mean, it's a little bit off topic, but you as a lawmaker, when you hear that Puerto Rico doesn't have power after 70 days, what do you think?
My initial reaction, but I was going to say, or we have a president that gives a shit about his fellow Americans, right? Sorry.
How do you really feel?
There's unfortunately, I think the local leadership's doing everything that they can to get them, back at where they should be. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources, and so that's when folks like Brewster and Jackie come in and hopefully bring them. But I can't. When you lose power, it's like you don't realize how much you use power until you lose it or you lose water. Like I think like water's the most. You can get by with that, but you don't realize. And I can't imagine. When there's been times during storms, Austin Energy's great. They get us back online quickly, but you have 2-3 hours without power in the middle of the night when you should be asleep, and it's a big deal. I can't imagine 7 days.
How do you feel about it when you hear that about Puerto Rico? And if someone came to you and said, we would love you, we need you to be a consultant to help us get back up and running?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that Puerto Rico has is that their system wasn't in a good state to begin with. So when we have storms and instances that happen here, which we recently did with Tropical Storm Harvey and in other areas of the state that are hit much harder, we could come in and rebuild the infrastructure and the system that we have. They're not really in a position to be able to do that because of those limitations and the costs and the engineering that needs to go into that. It's a big challenge, and I think it's really sad and it's unfortunate for those people. And you think about it, life is better with electricity. Think about water and treating of water and not having that readily available. And you look at emergency services and hospitals and all of that. So it's really a tragedy. It's just not a simple fix. There's a lot of engineering that needs to go into that. And then the biggest challenge that they have is safety. How do you reconnect all of these things? Because if you come in and you connect a diesel generator set and it's connected to a circuit, electricity is dangerous. And if you don't have the right protection schemes in place, people are going to be injured, or worse yet, people are going to be killed. And then how are you going to manage that for the system and the line workers that are out there to try to restore that system, and making sure that you have the protocols in place and that you're matching everything up and that you get the protection there so that somebody doesn't get hurt.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about gentrification. I was sharing with Brewster that I used to come to Austin a lot in the early 90s. And I remember in the late 90s, I was in a bar and this old guy said, some real estate agent told me I live in Travis Heights. What the hell's a Travis Heights? And how much this town has changed in terms of the folks that you represent and in the city itself. How has gentrification changed the way you think about energy for your constituents?
Well, I could go back to the Holly Power Plant, stories of that, and how, which was a power plant in East Austin that thankfully the council decided to close down because of all the environmental effects that it had. When I think of environmental issues in general, it really is a social justice issue, because when you have the power plants, the dumps, they're going to go in the places where the brown and black folks live. And so I'm thankfully, the Holly plant's been decommissioned. I think it's really close. It's taken almost over 20 years, but we're getting closer. These are concerns that are facing cities all across the country. It's not unique to Austin. It's every city is dealing with this kind of issue, but you have such little control over, as a council member and a policymaker, you have control over certain things. It's hard to control the market. It's hard to control different kinds of costs. But when it comes to energy costs, that is one thing that Austin is very unique in, that we own our public utility. The council is basically the board of directors for the public utility. We are accountable to Austinites, and I think that accountability has made us as green and as aggressive when it comes to renewables because of that, because the board of directors are constantly hearing from constituents and advocates saying, you need to do more, we need to be more aggressive. And so thankfully, I wish there were more minority voices. I wish there was a more diverse coalition of environmentalists. I think it would bring a great thing to this conversation.
I'm going to take questions from the audience after I ask one more. Tell me about a time when you had to make a compromise to get to the best that you could get to when it comes to energy production for your folks.
Sure, and I'm sure you remember this. Many of our decisions are compromises. You hear from all different voices, but one of them was a generation plan. Just recently, the original goal was 55% renewables by 2025, and advocates came and said we need to shoot for 75. We need to shoot for 75, and so I listened to them. We had meetings. I talked to them. I met with Jackie. Jackie came with her Austin Energy folks. They said, look, we'd love to be there, but there's some concerns with that. There's some concerns with costs. There's some concerns with technology changes. There's regulatory concerns. And so the compromise ended up being we are now 65%. Our goal is 65% renewable by 2027. And so that, I think, is an example that was a great compromise for both sides.
I see you nodding your head, Jackie.
I would agree with that. One of the things that we did, and I think it was really unique, the way we had a working group that came together and was appointed by or managed by the Electric Utility Commission, and the volunteers spent many hours and a number, I think it was 13 meetings over 7 months, and we had information that was shared from staff. We had people that came in and spoke to the group, and it was an effort to come to a compromise. There was give and take along that process, and looking at that from an affordability perspective, because we're really concerned about that when we look at our consumers and our customers, and we have low-income customers and the programs that we manage for those groups, making sure that we're able to continue to have rates that people can afford to pay is important.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, my colleague Steve.
I was going to go second.
Oh.
Thank you. This is a wonderful panel, and thank you all very much. I'm interested in, you mentioned O-Power, and for those people who don't know O-Power, I happen to have seen the founder of O-Power last night. and we were talking about they work with utility companies as it's a behavioral awareness issue of helping your what your neighbor's expending by way of energy, and I was interested in talking both to Alex last night and hearing you how that behavioral approach of awareness can be used in other dimensions of sustainability, whether it's on some of the things we've talked about with regards to how people look at transportation, how they look at open spaces, how they look more broadly at the kind of community sustainability picture, which is just beyond not only just personal energy use, but is more broad. So, Brewster, I don't know if this is for you, because you mentioned O-Power, but I'm intrigued with the behavioral model of awareness, whether that is useful or not in other areas.
Yeah, that's good. Because it's a huge issue in what we all do, is saying, okay, could behavior become part of the tool set? So first off, there are two kinds of relevant behaviors. There's what people do, and then there's what they buy. And it turns out that so what they buy is actually going to be typically more impactful. If you get them to buy insulation, if you get them to buy a more fuel-efficient car or a different light bulb, then they don't have to change what they do once they get it. It's just that the impact from, like low-flow shower heads, a great example. Get them to buy, you can still take a 10-minute shower, and you've reduced water use 50% from when it was 4 gallons a minute. Getting people to change what they do on a day-to-day basis is really a grind. It's a guest lectured at a UT engineering undergrad course a few years ago. I said it's the blinking VCR clock syndrome. And the class looked at me like, huh? I'm like, oh yeah, you guys don't know what a blinking, you know what a VCR is, right? But what it is that so the same people say, oh yeah, well my clock on my dashboard is right half the year, right? Mm-hmm. People's interaction with technology in the main is not that great, and so if you're really trying to say, okay, we're going to make the world work better by getting people to interact with technology, it's going to be a challenge, right? So really making our stuff work better, and then using data to make our machines more intelligent and serve us better. I think that's probably the more impactful pathway on behavior.
And before we go, I wanted to let you nerd out, geek out. We were talking about data, being data geeks back there. What's one piece of information that you've learned from all this data that you've gotten that when you tell people, their jaws drop? Leave us with a jaw drop.
Okay, well, I'll do an anecdote. Well, first off, so it's on the water side, actually, generally, it causes more amazement. So a typical house will use, if you said, what does an average house use a day? It's about 100 gallons a day. Now, I mean, if you have 2 people versus 4, it may be 60 versus 120. 100 gallons a day is a good, ordinary number for how much of indoor water use per day. Now, when people run their sprinkler system, how much water do you think they use typically? Some of y'all will know. This room would know. It's about 1,500 to 2,000 gallons in one night, right? You're using, you're using 2 to 3 weeks worth of indoor water use every time you water your yard, and I mean that's just shocking.
That's a jaw drop.
Yeah, but the other one is once we were doing some installs and we did some low-income apartment work, and we came to a gentleman's apartment, and so we got to fix something because one of those sensors we installed isn't working correctly, and he goes, what is it? And he said, it's for the oven. And he goes, hey, what's the matter with it? And he goes, well, it says your oven's always on, so we got something wrong with the little sensor. We got to get a new one. He goes, oh no, my oven always is on. And he's like, what? He goes, yeah, that way when we want to cook food, it's an electric oven, by the way. So Jackie knows. I mean, that's like 3,000. That's 3,000, 4,000 watts constant.
I think you just hurt her. Maybe.
Yeah. This gentleman was running the equivalent of 2 California homes constantly off of his oven alone, and he had no idea. And when he told some of that story, he goes, "Oh yeah, my grandmother used to do that too."
Like you said,
that's behavior.
It's about behavior, exactly. To Steve's point. Let's thank our panel.